The drawing-room of Grimwald Manor breathed wealth and power. Afternoon light streamed through tall windows, illuminating clusters of elegantly dressed ladies gathered for what Lady Pemberton had described as an intimate winter tea. Crystal reflected prismatic colors across walls papered in muted gold, while liveried footmen moved soundlessly between guests, offering fragrant Darjeeling and French pastries arranged like small works of art. The air hummed with refined conversation, the soft rustle of silk, and the occasional delicate laugh that suggested wit without impropriety. Rosamund Fairley had chosen a seat near the Italian marble fireplace, close enough to the conversational circle to appear engaged, but positioned just outside the primary gathering. She balanced her teacup with practiced precision, her posture perfect, her expression pleasantly attentive. At 24, she had learned to navigate these social waters with care, always present but never prominent enough to invite scrutiny. Not that she lacked beauty. Her auburn hair caught the light with copper warmth, and her hazel eyes held an intelligence that had drawn notice during her first season 6 years ago. But time and circumstance had a way of rendering even attractive women invisible. After her father's poor management had seen the Fairley fortunes dwindle from comfortable to precarious, marriage proposals had dried up like autumn leaves. She had refused the few offers that did come, unwilling to accept men who viewed her as a decorative solution to their own needs. But that refusal had come at a cost. Now she existed in that peculiar limbo reserved for women past their prime, marriageable years, but not yet quite on the shelf. She took a small sip of tea and allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. This was manageable. She would stay the requisite hour and a half, make pleasant conversation with Lady Pemberton, and return home having fulfilled her social obligations without incident. Perhaps she might even enjoy the excellent pastries, which were far superior to anything the Fairley household could afford these days. "That one!" The voice came from directly behind her chair, low and decisive. A voice accustomed to being obeyed. Rosamund went very still, her teacup frozen halfway to the saucer. "I beg your pardon, your grace." That was Lady Pemberton, her tone deferential but curious. "That young woman. The one by the fire with the auburn hair. Tell me about her." Rosamund's pulse quickened as she realized with creeping mortification that she was the subject of this scrutiny. The proper thing would be to turn around, to announce her presence, to save everyone from the awkwardness of discussing someone within earshot. But something in that imperious voice, something calculating and absolutely certain of its own authority, kept her paralyzed in her seat. She set her teacup down with exquisite care, her hands steady despite the sudden hammering of her heart, and prepared to discover exactly why the Dowager Duchess of Grimwald had taken an interest in Rosamund Fairley of Haworth. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel so others can discover and enjoy more Victorian-era romance stories like this from this same channel. Chapter 1. The words washed over Rosamund in waves of increasing absurdity. 18 months. Entailment clause. Distant cousin who would strip the estate. £10,000 immediately, with an additional settlement upon the birth of an heir. The Dowager Duchess spoke as though she were negotiating the purchase of a broodmare, her tone businesslike, almost bored. I am not asking you to fall in love with my son, Miss Fairley." Honoria Montford's pale eyes were sharp as cut glass. "Romance is a luxury neither of you can presently afford. What I am proposing is a transaction of mutual benefit. You provide the Montford line with its continuance. In exchange, your family's debts disappear, Haworth is restored to its former glory, and your brother completes his education at Oxford without the indignity of being withdrawn for lack of funds." Rosamund's mouth had gone dry. She was aware, distantly, that her hands were trembling in her lap. "You want me to marry your son, a man I have never met. I want you to bear his children," the dowager corrected with brutal precision. "The marriage is merely the socially acceptable framework for achieving that goal. My son is in need of an heir. You are in need of financial security. I see no conflict in our interests." The room tilted slightly. Rosamund set her teacup down before she could drop it. "This is madness. This is pragmatism." The dowager leaned closer, her voice dropping to something almost conspiratorial. "You are an intelligent woman, Miss Fairley. Surely you understand that romantic love is a fiction perpetuated by novelists and foolish girls. What I am offering you is reality, the means to save your family from ruin. All it requires is your willingness to fulfill a perfectly natural biological function." Rosamund stood abruptly, the chair scraping against polished wood. Several heads turned in their direction. "I must go. I cannot. This is impossible." She didn't wait for dismissal. She simply moved, her body carrying her toward the door, while her mind struggled to process what had just occurred. The corridor beyond the drawing room was mercifully empty, dim after the bright sociability she'd just escaped. Her breath came in short gasps that threatened to become something more desperate. She had nearly reached the entrance hall when she collided with something solid and unyielding. Strong hands caught her shoulders, steadying her before she could fall. "Careful!" Rosamund looked up into a face of striking severity. Dark hair, storm-gray eyes, and a jaw set in lines of barely controlled fury. He was tall enough that she had to tilt her head back, and there was something in his expression that suggested he was restraining himself from violence through sheer force of will. "Forgive me," she gasped. "I didn't see. No harm done." His voice was clipped, cold. He released her as though she'd burned him, stepping back with deliberate precision. "Are you unwell?" "No." "Yes." "I don't know." She was babbling now, words spilling out unbidden. "I'm sorry. I should not have been running." His eyes narrowed slightly, studying her face with an intensity that made her want to look away. "You were fleeing my mother's tea party." It wasn't a question. Rosamund felt heat flood her cheeks. "I simply needed air." For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with a curt nod that might have been dismissal or might have been something else entirely, he stepped aside. "Then I won't detain you." Rosamund fled past him, out into the cold December afternoon, completely unaware that she had just met the Duke of Grimwald. Chapter 2. The carriage ride back to Haworth took 2 hours, but Rosamund barely registered the passing countryside. Her mind kept returning to the dowager's words, turning them over like stones, examining them from every angle. £10,000. Oxford for Thomas. Hayworth restored. All for the price of her womb and her pride. The house appeared through bare winter trees like an accusation. Hayworth had been beautiful once. 3 stories of honey-colored stone with mullioned windows and gardens that had been the envy of the county. Now the stone was stained with damp. 2 windows on the east wing were boarded over, and the gardens had gone wild for want of a proper staff. They employed only 3 servants now, down from the 15 her grandmother had kept. Her father was in his study, surrounded by papers that appeared to be reproducing like malevolent offspring. He looked up when she entered, and the hope that flickered across his face nearly broke her. "Rosamund, how was Lady Pemberton's tea?" "Educational." She moved to the desk, her eyes falling on the document nearest her father's hand. Final notice, it proclaimed in aggressive red ink. "How bad is it?" His shoulders sagged. "We have until the end of January. After that—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. Thomas found her in the evening, sprawled in the window seat of what had once been the morning room. At 15, her brother still had the gangling awkwardness of youth, all elbows and optimism. "Rosa, are you quite well? You've been staring at nothing for an age." "Just thinking." She studied his face, so unbearably young. "How is school?" "Brilliant, actually. Mr. Pembroke says if I keep up my marks in mathematics, I might qualify for a scholarship to—" He stopped abruptly, something in her expression arresting him. "That is, I was thinking. University is rather expensive. Perhaps I could find a position instead. A clerk's apprenticeship, or—" "Don't be absurd. You're going to Oxford. Rosa, we both know. I said you're going to Oxford." The fierceness in her own voice surprised her. That night, she found her mother in the small parlor they still kept heated. Margaret Fairley sat before the fire, her hands full of jewelry that caught the light like captured tears. Her grandmother's sapphire set, the pearl bracelet that had been a wedding gift, a ruby brooch older than the house itself. "The jeweler offered £300 for the lot," her mother said without looking up. Her voice was eerily calm. £300 for 3 generations of Fairley women. He said the settings are outdated. No one wants old-fashioned jewelry anymore. Rosamund watched a tear slide down her mother's cheek and felt something inside her crystallize into resolve. She wrote the letter at midnight, her hand steady despite the magnitude of what she was agreeing to. She kept the wording simple, businesslike, matching the dowager's own pragmatic tone. But she added one condition of her own: 3 months to determine if she and the Duke could make a marriage work. 3 months to see if she could endure a lifetime with a stranger. 3 months to decide if saving her family was worth sacrificing herself. She sealed the letter before courage could fail her, and in the morning she sent it to Grimwald Manor. Chapter 3. The summons arrived 3 days later, written in a hand that was decidedly not the dowager's, bold, angular strokes that looked as though they'd been carved into the paper rather than written. Miss Fairley would present herself at Grimwald Manor at 2 o'clock Thursday afternoon. No pleasantries. No signature. Just the time and an expectation of obedience. Rosamund arrived precisely on time, her best dress doing little to disguise the fact that it was 2 seasons out of fashion. A stone-faced butler led her not to the drawing-room, but to what appeared to be a private study, dark with paneling, leather-bound books, and the lingering scent of tobacco and something sharper. Anger, perhaps, if anger had a smell. The Duke of Grimwald stood with his back to her, staring out a window that overlooked Winterbear Gardens. She recognized him immediately. The man from the corridor, the one she collided with in her flight. He didn't turn when she entered. "So you're the woman my mother has purchased for me." The words landed like a slap. Rosamund lifted her chin. "I was under the impression this was a mutual arrangement, Your Grace." He turned then, and the fury in those storm-gray eyes was breathtaking. "Mutual? You conspire with my mother to trap me into marriage, accept an obscene sum of money to bear my children, like some sort of hired broodmare, and you call this mutual?" "I conspired with no one," Rosamund said, her voice steady despite the heat rising in her cheeks. "Your mother approached me. I did not seek her out. How convenient. A struggling gentlewoman, desperate for funds, just happens to be in the right place at the right time." He moved closer, each step deliberate. "Tell me, Miss Fairley, how long have you been playing this? Did you research the Modford inheritance clause yourself, or did my mother provide those details? I knew nothing of your family's circumstances until your mother explained them. And I resent the implication that I am some sort of scheming fortune hunter." Her hands clenched in her skirts. "You may find this difficult to believe, Your Grace, but I find this entire situation as distasteful as you do." "Distasteful." He laughed, the sound bitter. "Yet not distasteful enough to refuse £10,000. Not distasteful enough to let my family starve, no." The words came out sharper than she intended. "I apologize if my desperate circumstances offend your delicate sensibilities, but unlike you, I don't have the luxury of refusing money on principle." Something flickered in his expression, surprise, perhaps, or grudging respect. "You have a sharp tongue for someone in your position, and you have a remarkable capacity for cruelty for someone who claims to be a gentleman." Silence stretched between them, taut as a wire. When he finally spoke, his voice had lost some of its heat. "My mother has put us both in an impossible situation. I won't pretend to like it, and I won't pretend to like you. But I am not entirely without mercy." He moved to his desk, withdrawing a sheet of paper. 3 months. You'll move into the East Wing. We'll maintain appearances at necessary social functions. At the end of that period, if either of us finds the prospect of marriage intolerable, the arrangement ends. My mother will settle £5,000 on your family regardless. That's generous. That's practical." He held out the paper. "And it ensures you leave here with something, even if this mad scheme fails. Do we have an agreement, Miss Fairley?" Rosamund took the document, their fingers not quite touching. "We do, Your Grace." "Then God help us both." Chapter 4. Rosamund arrived at Grimwald Manor on a Tuesday morning with a single trunk, her lady's maid Betsy, and a growing sense that she had made a terrible mistake. The manor loomed against a pale winter sky like something from a Gothic novel, all grey stone and mullioned windows, with towers that seemed designed specifically to make visitors feel insignificant. The housekeeper, Mrs. Blackwood, received them with the warmth of a hanging judge. "The Duchess's suite has been prepared for you, Miss Fairley." The emphasis on her unmarried title was subtle but unmistakable. The staff knew. Of course they knew. Servants always knew everything. The suite itself was breathtaking in a way that made Rosamund want to laugh or possibly weep. 3 rooms, a bedroom, a sitting room, and a private dressing room, each larger than the entire ground floor of Haworth. The bed alone could have slept 6 people comfortably. Silk wallpaper in eau de Nil. A fireplace carved with the Montfort coat of arms. Windows that overlooked formal gardens stretching toward distant woods. "It's very grand," Betsy whispered, her eyes wide. Grand? Yes. And suffocating. Rosamund felt the weight of centuries pressing down on her. All those Montfort duchesses who had occupied these rooms before her, legitimate wives who had earned their place through proper courtship rather than desperate financial transactions. The Duke made no appearance the first day, nor the second. On the third morning, Rosamund decided she would go mad if she spent another hour staring at silk wallpaper. She left Betsy mending stockings and went exploring. The library revealed itself at the end of a long corridor on the 2nd floor. She opened the door and stopped, her breath catching. 2 stories of books stretched toward a painted ceiling depicting some classical scene, gods and mortals intertwined. Rolling ladders provided access to upper shelves. Morning light streamed through tall windows, illuminating leather spines in every color imaginable. She was halfway up one of the ladders, reaching for a volume of Wollstonecraft, when a voice below her said, "I see you've found the one room in this house worth inhabiting." She nearly dropped the book. The Duke stood at the base of the ladder, his expression unreadable. "I apologize," she said, descending carefully. "I didn't realize this room was private." "It's not. Use it as you please." He moved to one of the reading tables, where several volumes lay open. Wollstonecraft. Interesting choice. I assume you disapprove. On the contrary, I find her arguments compelling, if occasionally overwrought. He glanced at her. "You've read A Vindication of the Rights of Woman?" "Twice. Though I suspect we interpret her conclusions differently." "Do we?" The ghost of something that might have been curiosity crossed his face. "She argues that women's apparent intellectual inferiority stems from inadequate education, not natural deficiency. She argues that women are rational beings deserving of the same educational opportunities as men," Rosamund corrected. "There's a difference between acknowledging a problem and demanding its solution." For the first time since she arrived, he looked at her, as though she might be something other than an inconvenience. "You're surprisingly well read for someone in your circumstances. Books are cheaper than gowns, Your Grace, and considerably better company than most people." The corner of his mouth twitched. Not quite a smile, but close. "On that, Miss Fairley, we are in complete agreement." Chapter 5. Lady Ashworth's dining room glittered with crystal and judgment in equal measure. Rosamund had been to elegant dinners before, but never one where she felt quite so much like a specimen under glass. 20 guests arranged at a table that could have hosted 50, each one a master of the subtle art of social dissection. "So tell me, Miss Fairley," Lady Ashworth said, her voice carrying the length of the table, "how did you and the Duke become acquainted? I confess I was quite surprised to learn of your attachment." The pause before attachment was deliberate. Rosamund felt every eye turned toward her. Beside her, Alaric's hand tightened imperceptibly on his wine glass. "We met through a mutual connection," Rosamund said carefully, "though I suspect his Grace found me rather clumsy at our first meeting." "Clumsy?" Lady Cromwell leaned forward with predatory interest. Alaric's voice cut in, smooth as silk. "Miss Fairley quite literally ran into me in a corridor. She was fleeing my mother's tea party in what appeared to be a state of profound distress." A ripple of laughter. Rosamund shot him a look that he met with the barest hint of amusement. "I was not in distress," she said. "I was merely overwhelmed by the conversation. My mother has that effect on people." His tone was perfectly dry. Miss Fairley looked as though she'd been ambushed by a particularly determined general. "Because I had been." The words escaped before she could stop them. More laughter, genuine this time. Even Lady Ashworth's mouth twitched. The evening continued in that vein, a careful dance of practiced lies and unexpected truths. When Lord Pemberton asked about their courtship, Rosamund felt panic rising in her throat. They hadn't prepared a story. They hadn't. "There was a moment," Alaric said quietly, his eyes on his plate, "in the library at Grimwald. She was reading Wollstonecraft and arguing with me about the nature of rational thought. She had ink on her fingers and complete certainty in her convictions, and I realized I was listening to someone who saw the world as clearly as I did. Perhaps more clearly." He looked up then, directly at her. "That was when I knew." The table had gone silent. Rosamund stared at him, her heart doing something complicated in her chest. The lie was so beautifully constructed, so detailed and specific, that for a moment she almost believed it herself. "How romantic!" someone murmured. Later, walking through Grimwald's gardens under a cold moon, they maintained careful distance between them. The performance was over. They could stop pretending now. "You were very convincing tonight," Rosamund said finally. "As were you. When you told Lady Cromwell that I had a brilliant mind hidden behind an unfortunate disposition, I nearly choked on my wine. I was being honest. You do have an unfortunate disposition." He laughed, an actual laugh, low and genuine. "We work well together. As adversaries. Is that what we are? I don't know what we are, Miss Fairley." He stopped walking, turning to face her. "But whatever lie we told in there tonight, it was disturbingly easy to tell. That should concern us both." It should. But as Rosamund looked at his face in the moonlight, she found herself wondering if the most dangerous lies were the ones that contained fragments of truth. 3 months, she said softly. 3 months, he agreed. Neither of them mentioned that 5 weeks had already passed. Chapter 6. The rhythm established itself so gradually that Rosamund barely noticed when hostility became habit, and habit became something almost comfortable. Breakfast in the morning room, sunlight slanting across silver and porcelain, the rustle of newspapers, and the clink of teacups. Alaric read the Times. She read whatever book currently occupied her attention. They didn't speak much, but the silence had lost its sharp edges. The first book appeared on her library chair on a Thursday, a volume of romantic poetry she'd mentioned wanting to read. No note. No explanation. Just the book, placed precisely where she always sat. She annotated the margins and left it on his desk. 2 days later, a treatise on agricultural reform appeared. She responded with her own notes, challenging his underlined passages. It became a conversation conducted entirely in ink and paper, arguments and agreements layered across pages. "You have terrible handwriting," he said one evening, not looking up from the book he was reading. "You have terrible opinions about crop rotation. My opinions are supported by empirical evidence. Your evidence is supported by men who've never actually worked the land." He did look up then, one eyebrow raised. "You have experience with agriculture, Miss Fairley? My father manages our estate. Managed it before." She trailed off. "I used to help with the accounts." Something shifted in his expression. "Would you like to see Grimwald's lands? The estate, I mean. Not just the gardens." They began walking in the afternoons, when weather permitted. The estate stretched for miles. Tenant farms, woodland, fields lying fallow for winter. Alaric knew every family, every acre, every problem that needed solving. "My father loved this land," he said one day, standing at the crest of a hill overlooking the valley. "He used to bring me here as a boy and tell me that being Duke meant being responsible for all of this. Every person, every animal, every tree. When he died, I thought I was ready. I wasn't. No one ever is," Rosamund said quietly. "I wake up some nights convinced I'm failing him. That I'm failing all of them." He gestured toward the distant cottages. "If Tobias inherits, he'll evict every tenant and sell the land piecemeal. He's already told me as much. Then we won't let him inherit." He turned to look at her. "Is that why you agreed to this? Guilt?" "Partially." She pulled her cloak tighter against the wind. "My mother had such romantic dreams for me. A love match, a proper courtship, all the things she had. Instead, I'm selling myself to save my family's home. Some days I can barely look at her. You're not selling yourself, aren't I? £10,000 in exchange for bearing your children. What else would you call it?" The silence stretched between them. Finally he said, "There was someone. 5 years ago. Charlotte. We were engaged. She died of fever 3 weeks before the wedding." Rosamund's breath caught. "I'm sorry. I thought I couldn't survive it." The grief was consuming. He stared out at the valley. "I told myself I'd never risk that pain again. That caring for someone that deeply was a kind of madness. I was engaged once too," she heard herself say, "before my father's losses became public knowledge. Edward was the second son of a viscount. When the money disappeared, so did he. He sent a letter breaking the engagement, citing irreconcilable differences in circumstance. He was a fool. He was practical. Just like we're being practical now. Alaric turned to face her fully. Are we being practical? The question hung between them, unanswered. Because the truth was becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. Somewhere between the arguments and the books and the walks, something had begun growing between them that had nothing to do with practicality at all. Chapter 7. The letter arrived during breakfast, delivered by a rider whose horse was still steaming in the courtyard. Rosamund's hand shook as she broke the seal, her eyes scanning the words once, twice, trying to make them mean something other than what they said. Thomas. Accident. Horse spooked. Broken arm, possible concussion. Stable now, but... The paper slipped from her fingers. She was aware, distantly, that she'd made some sound. A gasp or perhaps a sob. Alaric was beside her in an instant, retrieving the letter, reading it with swift efficiency. "Get your cloak," he said. "We leave in 15 minutes. I can't ask you to. You're not asking. I'm telling you. 15 minutes, Rosamund." The use of her Christian name barely registered. She was already moving, her mind filled with images of Thomas hurt, Thomas alone, Thomas needing her while she'd been playing at being a duchess in someone else's home. The journey to Haworth was a blur of speed and silence. Alaric sat across from her, his presence solid and somehow steadying. When she started to cry, great, shuddering sobs she couldn't control, he moved to sit beside her, offering a handkerchief without comment. She took it, grateful he didn't try to offer empty reassurances. Thomas was propped up in bed when they arrived, his arm splinted and bandaged, a spectacular bruise blooming across his left temple. He looked very young and very pale, but his eyes lit up when he saw her. "Rosa! I'm perfectly well, truly. The doctor said I was lucky, though I feel rather stupid. Cicero spooked at a rabbit, of all things, and I wasn't paying proper attention." She hugged him carefully, mindful of his injuries, and felt something in her chest unclench. Over the next 3 days, Rosamund watched Alaric move through her home with an ease that surprised her. He played chess with Thomas, listening with genuine interest to her brother's enthusiasm for mathematics. He walked the estate with her father, discussing drainage and crop yields with the respect of one landowner to another. He charmed her mother simply by being kind. "He's not what I expected," her mother said quietly, watching Alaric teach Thomas a new chess strategy. "When you told me about the arrangement, I thought, but he looks at you, Rosamund. Really looks at you." Did he? She didn't dare examine that thought too closely. On the journey back to Grimwald, the space between them felt different, charged with something unnamed. When the carriage hit a rut and their hands collided on the seat between them, neither pulled away. His fingers curled around hers, warm and certain. "Thank you," she said softly, "for coming with me, for being kind. Rosamund." His voice was rough. "I wasn't being kind. I was being selfish. I needed to see you with your family. I needed to understand what you're fighting for, what you're sacrificing. And now you've seen it. Now I've seen it." His thumb traced circles on her palm. "And I understand that this arrangement was never fair to you. that I was angry at the wrong person, that you're the bravest woman I've ever met." That night, she found him in the library, staring into the fire. She should have gone to bed, should have maintained the careful distance they'd built. Instead, she sat beside him. "Alaric!" He turned to her, and whatever he saw in her face made his breath catch. When he kissed her, it was with a desperation that matched her own, months of resistance crumbling in an instant. His hands cradled her face like she was something precious, something worth protecting. When they finally broke apart, his forehead rested against hers. "This wasn't supposed to happen." "I know." "We were supposed to be practical." "I know." "Rosamund, Don't," she whispered. "Not yet. Just let this be enough for now." But they both knew everything had changed. Chapter 8. The garden party was Honoria's idea, a calculated display of the happy couple to London's most influential families. Rosamund wore pale yellow silk, and tried not to feel like a lamb dressed for slaughter. Alaric stayed close to her side, his hand occasionally brushing the small of her back in a gesture that had become natural over the past weeks. Tobias Montfort arrived like a curse made flesh. He was lean and sharp-featured, with pale eyes that reminded Rosamund of something predatory. He cut through the crowd with deliberate purpose, making certain everyone noticed his approach. "Cousin," he said, the word dripping with false warmth. "How delightful to finally meet your companion." His gaze swept over Rosamund with calculated insult. "Miss Fairley, is it? Of the Hayworth Fairleys? Such a modest family connection." Alaric's body went rigid beside her. "You weren't invited, Tobias." "No? How careless of me." He smiled, all teeth and malice. "I simply wanted to congratulate you on your impending marriage. Though I confess, I've been doing some research into the matter. Fascinating, really, how quickly this courtship developed. Almost as if it were orchestrated." The nearby conversations had ceased. Everyone was listening now. "I'm not sure what you're implying," Rosamund said, her voice steady despite the ice forming in her veins. "Aren't you? A penniless gentlewoman, a desperate duke facing an inheritance clause, a dowager duchess known for her strategic mind." He ticked off the points on his fingers. "It reads rather like a business transaction, doesn't it? One designed specifically to circumvent family law. The House of Lords takes a dim view of fraudulent marriages." "Fraudulent?" Alaric's voice was dangerously quiet. "You overstep, cousin." "Do I? I have documentation of your family's debts, Miss Fairley. Letters between you and the Dowager Duchess discussing terms and compensation. Evidence of a contract, if you will." He paused, savoring the moment. "Of course, if the marriage were called off, these documents might disappear. If pressed forward, however, I'd be forced to present them. For the integrity of the Montfort name, you understand." Rosamund felt the world narrowing to a single point of clarity. She stepped forward, her chin raised. "Mr. Montfort, you mistake me for someone who can be intimidated by a man wielding half-truths and desperation." Her voice carried across the suddenly silent garden. "Yes, my family has financial difficulties. Yes, the Dowager Duchess approached me. But if you believe that reduces my relationship with the Duke to a mere transaction, then you understand nothing about either of us. I have spent 3 months at Grimwald Manor. 3 months discovering that the man you're attempting to slander is worth 10 of you. If you wish to drag this matter before the House of Lords, do so. I will stand beside him and answer every question with complete honesty. Can you say the same about your motivations? Tobias's smile faltered. You little... That's enough. Alaric's voice cut like a blade. Leave my home. Now! And if you approach Miss Fairley again, contract or no contract, inheritance be damned, I will make it my life's work to destroy you. The threat hung in the air. Tobias left, but the damage was done. The whispers had already begun. Later, in Alaric's study, they faced each other across an impossible distance. We should end this, Alaric said quietly, before he ruins you completely. No. Rosamund. I said no. She moved closer to him. I'm not walking away from you. Not from what we've built. If we marry under suspicion, then we prove them wrong by living honestly. Together. You're certain? I've never been more certain of anything. He pulled her into his arms, and she felt him exhale against her hair. Then we marry. On our terms. And God help anyone who tries to stop us. Chapter 9. The chapel at Grimwald was small, built in the 13th century by a Montfort ancestor who believed in intimacy with God rather than ostentation. Morning light filtered through stained glass, painting the stone floor in jeweled colors. 50 guests, no more, family, close friends, and the tenants who had known Alaric since childhood. Honoria had protested the modest scale. A duke's wedding should be a spectacle. Our wedding, Alaric had replied firmly, will be honest. Rosamund wore cream silk that had belonged to Alaric's grandmother, altered to fit her smaller frame. Her mother had wept when she saw it, not tears of disappointment, but of unexpected joy. Thomas stood proud in his new coat, his arm finally healed, ready to give his sister away in their father's stead. When Alaric turned to watch her walk down the aisle, Rosamund saw everything she needed to know written plainly on his face. This was no performance. No transaction. The way he looked at her made her feel seen in a way she'd never been before, wholly, completely, without reservation. The ceremony was brief, traditional, binding. She spoke her vows in a steady voice. His hands trembled slightly when he placed the ring on her finger. When the vicar pronounced them married, Alaric kissed her with a tenderness that suggested this was the beginning of something rather than the conclusion of a bargain. The wedding breakfast was held in Grimwald's great hall, filled with conversation and surprising laughter. But it was later, in the privacy of what was now their shared sitting room, that Alaric gave her his true wedding gift. The box was mahogany, inlaid with mother of pearl, and locked with an ornate key he placed in her palm. Her hand shook as she turned it, lifted the lid, and saw the documents inside. Deeds, legal papers, all bearing the Hayworth estate name. I don't understand, she whispered. Hayworth has been fully restored and repaired. The debts paid, the roof fixed, the staff rehired. And it's yours, Rosamund. In your name alone. No legal connection to me or to this marriage. If you ever wish to leave, Alaric, please let me finish. He knelt before her chair, taking her hands in his. You need to understand that my choice to marry you has nothing to do with heirs or duty or that damned inheritance clause. If we're blessed with children, I'll be grateful. If we're not, I'll still consider myself the most fortunate man in England. You are enough, Rosamund. You have always been enough. Tears spilled down her cheeks. You've given me back my home. I've given you a choice. You can keep Haworth. Return to it if you ever wish to leave Grimwald, or do with it whatever brings you peace. Because I need you to know that you're not trapped here. That you're not. He swallowed hard. That my love for you isn't contingent on anything you provide. It simply is. She set the box aside and cupped his face in her hands. I spent so long believing my only value was what I could offer others. My family name, my potential children, my ability to be useful. You're telling me I'm enough just as I am. You are everything just as you are. She kissed him then, tasting salt and joy and the future they would build together. Not despite how they began, but because they'd had the courage to transform something transactional into something true. I choose you, she whispered against his lips. I choose this. I choose us. Every day, every single day. And in the golden afternoon light of Grimwald Manor, they began their marriage the way all good marriages begin, with honesty, with choice, and with love that had been earned rather than assumed. The end. You enjoyed the story? Then like, subscribe, and help others fall in love with these captivating Victorian-era romance stories, just as you did.